Welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe that our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about the 5 elements of an effective classroom management plan. If you've been listening to Teach for the Heart for long, you've probably heard me talk about a classroom management plan before. But what I want to do in this episode is start off by sharing why a classroom management plan is so effective and why, if you're struggling with classroom management and you don't have a plan, why it is like the very necessary next step for you to succeed and to be able to reduce disruptions in your classroom. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it matters, and then we're going to talk about the 5 elements of a plan and how to make one. So first of all, why is a classroom management plan so important? Well, what happens is if we as teachers don't know what we're going to do when problems arise, okay? If we are unsure of how we're going to handle them, and we don't have innate skills. Okay, so at some point, if you are an expert at classroom management, you don't necessarily have to say, I know exactly what I'm going to do, because you have so many tools in your toolkit and you are like, oh, I'll know what to do when the time comes. But if you're new or if you're struggling with classroom management, you're like, I won't know what to do when the time comes. I don't know. Then we really, really need a plan, because if we are like that, if we're like, I don't really know what to do, when something comes up, I'm like, I don't know. Then what happens is we are really inconsistent. We might just not deal with the problem at all. That's what happened for me. When I first started teaching, I didn't really have a plan for how I was going to handle even basic things like talking or a kid putting their head down or blurting out answers and things, just little things like this. I didn't have a plan. So when they happened, I didn't do anything because I didn't know what to do. Or I think I gave a look, but a look by itself is that's not enough of a plan. So I didn't do anything. Other teachers really struggle with being consistent. So you might find yourself being really just letting it go sometimes, I don't do anything, or just just saying something real quick, or one time you totally let it go, the next time you say something, the next time you fly off the handle because you've had it and you're losing it with them. And it's just really inconsistent. And the problem is, when we're not consistent like this, things really do fall apart. And part of the reason why is that students naturally push boundaries. That is just human nature in a fallen world. They're going to push the boundaries. They're going to try to figure out where they are. And so if we're not keeping that line clear, if we're really inconsistent on where we draw the line, they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing those lines way past where we want them to be. And so what starts out as these little problems, it's just kids whispering, or they just blurt out an answer here or there, I just got up and did something around the room without permission or whatever. It starts out small, but if we don't deal with it, and if we don't deal with it consistently, it's just going to grow and grow and grow. And before we know it, there's way more problems, volume grows, and we can get to the point very quickly where it's like, oh my goodness, there are so many interruptions and disruptions, I can hardly get through my lesson. And anytime I try to do something remotely fun, it's just chaos, right? So it's really not good. And what happens more too is when we're inconsistent, students kind of sense our uncertainty. It's really like this beacon saying, I don't know what I'm doing. You can get away with more stuff. Not the beacon we want to put out, right? And so students then do more and it gets worse. So the good news is, though, a written plan fixes that. Or at least it is the first key step towards fixing that. Because with a written plan, you know exactly what you're going to do when students misbehave, when a student blurts it out in an answer, when students are whispering, when a student gets up and wanders around the room, and the bigger issues too, swearing, disrespect, fighting, all those things too. So you know what to do for all these different classroom scenarios. So then when it happens, you have some confidence, even if you're still a little scared, you're like, I do know what to do. And all you have to do is follow your plan. So it helps you be so much more consistent because all I'm doing is following the plan I made, right? And as you're more consistent, students are still going to push those boundaries. But as you are consistently holding that boundary, the boundary starts to become clear. Okay, here's the line. Every time I cross it, the same thing happens. So students start to respect those boundaries. They start to respect you. And the disruptions diminish tremendously. You're able to actually teach. You're able to actually have time to interact with your students, help them, and even get to the point where you're doing the fun things that you want to be able to do in your classroom without it devolving into chaos. And what happens is that beacon that was flashing, I don't know what I'm doing, try more, you can get away with stuff. It reverses that. And now, as your confidence builds and as you're consistent, this unspoken beacon starts saying, I know what I'm doing. Don't mess with me. Don't cross the line. And that intangible is so powerful to our students. So a written classroom management plan is really, I believe, the foundation. Like I said, if someone, a master teacher won't need a plan, just like a master chef, one of these on these cooking shows, they don't need recipes because they have mastered their craft. So a teacher that has mastered classroom management doesn't need to write down a plan because they are a master. But for those of us that are struggling or newer, we need the recipe, right? We need a plan to follow, and it can make a world of a difference. Like I said, it really is the first step. So here are the 5 parts of a classroom management plan. I'm going to tell them briefly, and then we'll go through them one by one. The first is clear expectations. Second, smart procedures. Third, positive reinforcement. Fourth, logical consequences. And 5, planned responses. And real quick, let me talk a moment about a written plan. It is really, really powerful to write down your plan, because if I say, do you know what to say when students blurt out an answer? Or do you know what you're going to do when this? Or if I were to say, what do you expect from your students as far as, their behavior? And you might be like, oh yeah, I know what to do. Like, I think I got that. And it's funny because when it's in our mind, it might actually be kind of fuzzy, but we're like, oh yeah. But when we have to write it down, it helps us realize, oh, actually, I don't actually know exactly. I actually haven't really made this line very clear. I don't actually know exactly what I'm going to say. So writing down really helps bring clarity. It helps us to clarify, oh, what do I actually know? And what do I still need to think through? And then it also is something you can look back on, right? You can actually look back and say, okay, what did I decide? Oh yeah, this is what I decided. So then it's there for you to reference throughout the year whenever you need it. So let's go through these one by one. Step 1, clear expectations. In this step, you need to go through and define where exactly that line is. Remember we said we need clear boundaries. Where is that line? What behavior is and isn't acceptable for you in your classroom? And this is something I think a lot of times we skip. Like we just think, oh yeah, I know what I want to expect, but do we really? I know when I first started teaching, like a kid would put their head down on their desk, and in the moment while I'm trying to teach, I'm like, is that okay? Do I allow them to put their head down? Do I make them sit up? Like I haven't thought this through, and that's something super super small, but there's about 100 of those things in your classroom, right? Where it's like if we haven't thought through in my mind, like, what am I going to allow? Where is the line? Then when it comes in the classroom, we're not going to be confident to deal with it because we don't even know if it's okay or not. So we have to get really clear on that ahead of time. And that makes such a big difference for us to know where the line is. And by the way, when people say pick your battles, this is the place to pick your battles, okay? Where you say, where am I going to draw the line? And there might be things you say, I'm going to allow that because I think it's fine and I think it's not worth fighting that battle. And there'll be other things where you say, yes, this is the line. I am going to fight this battle. And so I think that's really important to clarify what behavior is and isn't acceptable and to get really clear in your mind. Even things like talking, it might be like, is the expectation really no talking? Well, probably not. You might be like, well, I want them to be allowed to talk here and I don't. And I mean, I've had so many teachers say, well, I want them to be able to have like some lively conversations, but then it gets crazy here. So you want to think about that. Okay, what is ideal? And a lot of teachers say, well, I need talking levels, right? We need to clarify. Okay, this is a time when open discussion is allowed. This is a time when everyone needs to listen. This is a time when quiet discussion is allowed. So you can kind of have different times. Once again, getting clear in your mind. What does it look like? So that then you can articulate that expectation to your students and know where to draw the line. And just one thought on this before we need to move on, and that is I encourage you to you do want to pick your battles, But you also want to guard against lowering your expectations, thinking, oh, that'll help students meet them. I'll tell you a quick story. You've probably heard this before. I had an expectation for my students. I wanted them to have a green pen to grade with. So when we graded something in class, like we just, grade homework or something, I wanted them to use green, then I would use red. So it was really clear, like this was theirs. Anyhow, a lot of kids wouldn't have a green pen. And so then I'd be like, all right, use a pen, and I'd keep track. And it was just like kind of a headache always trying to get the people to have a green pen. But I was like, everybody always has a pen. So this year I'm going to lower that expectation and just say, have a pen, everyone have a pen, and then we won't have to deal with this anymore. It sounded great in theory. But what ended up happening was, rather than now everyone before, most people had a green pen. Some people didn't have a green pen, but they had a pen because we did math in pencil. So at least it was a different instrument. So when I said, okay, any pen is fine, now it didn't solve the problem, because basically the people that used to have a green pen now had a pen, but the people that used to not have a green pen but at least have a pen, now they had no pen at all. So all that happened was like I lowered the expectation, so it was not quite as ideal, and rather than solving the problem, it just brought the bar down, and the kids that weren't meeting the bar still didn't meet the bar. And I had still the same problem, except now it was like not even what I wanted. And when they didn't have the pen, it was even worse, because now they had like nothing to use except what I didn't want them to use. So my point is, be careful about lowering expectations, because it's like, oh, maybe students can meet them. Keep them high. Be reasonable. Choose your battles, choose where you want to. But if you're like this, but really think, what is ideal? What is important? And I encourage you to set that bar high, because there will always be students who don't meet it. There will always be students who push past the boundary no matter where you set it. So set it where it should be, so that when students don't meet it, they're not like way down, way down, or way past where you want them to be anyhow. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. We talk about that a lot in our programs. So that's number one, clear expectations. And when we work with teachers in our programs, actually what we do is we have a document, and you actually go through and it asks a lot of questions. It says, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it helps you think through all the different areas. And in our programs, we actually also have a idea bank that then you can kind of copy and paste and tweak so that it just doesn't take a long time. But if you're doing it on your own, you just kind of want to think through, what are all the various areas of my classroom? Like, what are all the different things, different behavior issues I deal with, or different, things that we do, and just clarify what you want to expect in each of those. All right, that's number one, clarify your expectations. Number two, smart procedures. It's really important to have procedures that reduce chaos and keep things running smoothly. And we've talked before about how important it is to teach and to hold students to procedures. But when you're making your plan, you're just basically thinking through the procedures that I have. And if you're a new teacher, you have to think through every single thing you're doing in your classroom. You have to think through every area. And once again, in our programs, we have kind of a guide that helps you think through all these different areas. So if you're new, you got to think through literally everything. From the moment students walk in, everything you do, you need to think through, what is the best way to do this? What is the most organized way to do this that can eliminate problems and reduce issues? If you are not a new teacher, so you already have a lot of procedures. So what I recommend for you is to stop and think, what areas were chaotic? Where was the chaos? And those are the procedures that you want to go back and be like, okay, how can we tweak these? What can I do instead to make it run more smoothly? So number one, clear expectations. Number two, smart procedures. Number three, positive reinforcement. We want to plan ways to encourage our students and motivate good behavior. And most of you are probably already doing that. You're already finding ways to encourage your students and motivate them. But I think this is important not to neglect in our written plan, because it can sometimes fall through the cracks when things get busy and a lot is going on. It can fall by the wayside. So there's a ton of ways to do this. You can have a formal behavior or a formal reward system. Some teachers love having this huge class economy and all of that. But it also can be as simple as just encouraging our students, sending positive notes home. But you want to make sure you think through, what are the ways I'm going to encourage? What are the ways I'm going to, if I want to reward? We talk a lot. I think there's other episodes where we kind of dive into the rewards and all of that. Maybe we can link to them in the show notes for this episode at teachfortheheart.com/311. But basically thinking through what kind of rewards do I want to use, if I want to use rewards and all of that. And then if I don't want to have like a reward system, am I going to use them spontaneously? Or am I just going to use encouragement? And so thinking all through that, deciding about it so it doesn't fall through the cracks. All right, part 4 is logical consequences. And once again, we have whole conversations on logical consequences. And, if you're kind of like, should I even use consequences? We've talked about that before on the podcast. If you head to teachfortheheart.com/311, we'll try to link to some of those other episodes if you want to check those out. But for now, I just want to talk about what we do in this section. So I really do believe that this is an important piece of your classroom management plan. It's just one piece. It's not the entire plan, but it is important to have consequences. I'm like resisting the urge to go into the whole thing again, right? They are a natural part of life. And so it's important not to artificially remove them from our classroom. So at this point in the plan, what you're doing is you're starting with your school's discipline system and saying, are there already consequences in my school's discipline system? Because I want to make sure I'm following that. And then you ask yourself, well, what is missing? Okay. So in other words, at the school, I'll give an example. At the school I taught at, they had detentions, but they were like a big deal. And so I wouldn't give a detention if a student's talking in class. That didn't make sense. So I need to think through, okay, well, what's a consequence? What are some consequences I could use in my classroom that like fall short of the detention? So that's what this is about. It's about thinking through what consequences do make sense, what consequences would fit for me in my classroom and fit the culture of my school. And when we work with teachers, we have a lot of ideas to help you. We do have a consequence ideas list that I will link in the show notes, teachfortheheart.com/311, that you can check that out there if you need some ideas. So going through and thinking through, though, what are some consequences that I could use in addition to what is school-wide in my school? Have those ready to go. Then step 5 is my favorite because it's where everything comes together, and this is the magical part. So in step 5, you plan your actual responses. So you actually think through, what am I going to say? What am I going to do when students are disruptive or misbehaving? And in our program, we have a list of all these common scenarios. What are you going to do? Students are blurting out answers. Students are talking. Students are rude. All the common scenarios, okay? And so you want to think through each one of those. And in our programs, we have idea banks for that too. You can kind of just copy, paste, and tweak ideas. But if you're doing this on your own, you just want to think through, okay, what am I going to do for all of these different scenarios? And you actually write down, I'm going to say this, or this is the consequence, or I'm going to ask them to redo it, or whatever it is. However you're going to handle it, you write it down. And can you imagine how much clarity you will have walking into your classroom with a list of, for all the common issues that I face, all the common behavior things that come up, this is what I'm going to do. Knowing what you're going to do, you're going to be confident. You are going to be much more able to actually follow through and do what's on your plan. And that's going to make such a difference starting day 1 in your classroom when you do that. So I really hope that you take this to heart, that you invest. It is a little bit of an investment of time to put together a classroom management plan, but you're going to be so, so glad you did it if classroom management and disruptions have been any part of the challenge in your classroom. And I will say, if you're saying, Linda, this sounds great, but that sounds like a lot of work, what if I don't know? What if I don't know what to do for all these classroom problems? I really encourage you to join us in one of our classroom management programs. I'm going to tell you about 2 of them. And in both of these programs, we help you write your classroom management plan. That template that I was talking to you about, you have that, and you also have all of the copy and paste idea bank. So you can, for all of these, it's like we give you, first of all, the trainings, very quick trainings, but we like to kind of give you all of our advice on it, and the tools that you need. And then we have the template where you can simply go, okay, here's like 3 different options. This is the one that's best for me. I'm going to tweak this a little bit. And it makes it so much faster and easier to go through. So the first program that we have is your Smooth Running class. And that is actually running during July. So it's actually, if you're listening to this when this episode airs, it's happening very, very soon, where we go through it with you over the summer, and you're in like a group of teachers who are all doing like the same thing the same week. You don't have to show up for anything live, and you keep the program, so there's no pressure to like finish it in a certain time frame, but it's nice to be like, okay, everyone's working on this week, and we're working on it together, and we're going to have some live things that you can attend if you want, where we're working together and answering questions and all of that. So your Smooth Running class is a great program to help you put together. The goal is to put together the plan that I just talked about, so you have it ready to go on day 1 of school. And I believe the URL, I'm going to check it here real quick. The URL that you can use for that is teachfortheheart.com/smooth. So teachfortheheart.com/smooth will get you to your Smooth Running class. And I'll also link to it at teachfortheheart.com/311. The second one I want to mention is recommended if you are listening to this later. So depending on when you're listening to this, your Smooth Running class might be closed because we are starting very soon and we are going to close enrollment so that we can go through it together. But year round, we have available Classroom Management 101. And Classroom Management 101 starts with the exact same thing. We are going to do the exact same thing I just talked about. We're going to help you create your classroom management plan. And we do have coaching calls and other resources, support inbox, and things to help you if you have questions. So you get the template, you get the idea bank, you get the trainings, all of that in Classroom Management 101. What's different about your Smooth Running class in Classroom Management 101 is Classroom Management 101 is self-paced. And then secondly, you get way more. So after you make your classroom management plan, we also help you figure out how do you implement the plan? How do you adjust what isn't working? And then how do you motivate and engage your students? Because that's a whole nother piece that really ties into this as well. So classroom management plan is like step one, and that's what we do in your Smooth Running class. Classroom Management 101 also starts with step one and then goes on to step 2, 3, 4, and like helps you build on that foundation. So either one of those programs is going to be incredibly helpful for you. Once again, we'll link to both of them at teachfortheheart.com/311, but I'll give the links here too. Smooth Running class, teachfortheheart.com/smooth. That's happening this July. Year round available Classroom Management 101 at teachfortheheart.com/CM101. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on the blog post at teachfortheheart.com/311 or email us hello@teachfortheheart.com. We would love to answer any questions you have. This episode has been brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All the views and opinions are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. Thank you guys so much for being here. I look forward to being with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.